Howdy everyone, and welcome to another episode of FloridaMan40k. We are here in the aftermath of the Atlanta Open, the Pro Tabletop Tournament, to talk what it's all about. And I have with me today your favorite co-stars, or at least my favorite co-stars, Daniel Smith.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And Jimmy, better at creating nicknames than I am, Prescott.
Oof, that's me, Jimmy Prescott.
Jimmy P.
Yeah.
All right. So, diving right in, we're definitely going to be talking a lot about the Pro Tabletop Tournament that was held this past weekend. There's definitely a lot of discussion going into the event. I don't think I've seen an event besides LVO generate this much conversation leading into it. A lot of people had opinions, but overall, I would say that it went better than expected, certainly from my end. So we'll have a lot to talk about on that point. And then after that, I think we're going to kind of stay in the same vein and talk about the future of standardized 40K and competitive 40K and just kind of discuss how we think that will all play out.
Yeah, but before we get into that too far, I'm going to do a little bit of bookkeeping. So, of course, the first thing is a big shout out to Lee with Battleboard Studios. Go check out his stuff. It's awesome. Use the discount code FloridaMan25 and you'll get $25 off your purchase. He recently just started doing terrain, actually. So in addition to getting a battle board, you can get a full table's worth of terrain. And that stuff also looks pretty great. After that, we do have Andy Ford hosting the Roll Tide War Eagle GT. That is early 2020. Actually the same weekend as Charity Hammer. So check out both those events. They're going to be a ton of fun. Our own John Lennon is going to be at Charity Hammer. I was just listening to Colin over there with Best in Faction talking about that. I really like Charity Hammer. I just think it's a great thing that they do. And Colin was talking about it, so I can mention it. Sigler and
Mark Perry.
Yes, thank you. So Sigler, Perry, Lennon, all going to represent Brohammer. It's going to be great. Jim Vessel is going to be there. And Lennon, did you want to talk a little bit about Sigler and his Tau v Tau matchup and how they're doing that? Because I think that's kind of pretty cool.
Ooh, let's see if I remember the specifics of it. Yeah. I think the plan is that Sigler and Brian Pullen will have a Tau off because you know, they both have won super majors very recently with Tau because Tau are winning all the super majors. And therefore, you got to see who's number one. But having a Tau versus Tau is kind of boring because if you go first and have like the range already, the game's over. So they didn't want to just do a traditional Tau versus Tau. So I believe what they ended up doing is that Brian Pullen and Richard Sigler both ended up nominating a champion who is going to play a custom non-Tau list into their opponent's Tau player. So Richard Sigler chose Nick Nanavati and Brian Pullen chose Jim Vessel. And so Jim and Brian will be working on making a list to beat Richard's Tau. And Richard and Nick will work on making a list for Nick to beat Brian's Tau. And that is going to be how they determine who is the best Tau player. It's not just about who plays the army well, it's who knows the weaknesses and can kind of deconstruct it with another list. So that'll be very interesting. I actually made the prediction that I think Brian and Richard will both lose their games because if you build specifically to hard counter Tau, I think it can be done. But we'll see how it ends up. I'm certainly very interested to watch those games in person if I'm not playing something else. Should be a ton of fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And I also want to see a you and Jim rematch because those are always good games.
I know I'm going to be playing Jim probably at some point that weekend. I haven't even looked at the schedule yet. I do know that I'm also going to be playing Brian Pullen for the first time, it looks like. So that'll be fun. Get a little SoCal 1-on-2 action going on.
Yeah, I also want to see you and Nick because I always feel like,
oh man,
that's when you play the most like outside the box Warhammer. And that's always really cool to see just that mentality and mindset. It's completely different. So I know we're on a little bit of a tangent, but as a podcast, we can do what we want.
We can do what we want. Definitely last year I had to do some out of the box stuff. I think the highlight of it was throwing the Broodlord into the middle of his army and also charging his Orc Boy mobs with my vultures. Those were definitely highlights of the weekend for me. It'll be good. He's got my number, so I've got to take it back at some point. But hopefully it'll be that weekend. And that is going to be, I believe it's the weekend January 4th and 5th. Whatever that Saturday-Sunday combination is, although Charity Hammer starts Friday evening, that is when both the Roll Tide War Eagle GT and Charity Hammer will be held. So make sure you check those out.
Yeah,
one last little...
one and watch the other.
Yes, go to one, watch the other. If you can't go to one, then definitely watch the other. You have no excuse not to. Other things that I want to mention, we are holding a giveaway for the month of December. Basically, there's a post, actually there's 2 posts on the FloridaMan40k podcast page. One of them is by me, and one of them is by Daniel Smith, and one is by the page sharing that post. So comment on either of those, and you could potentially win a set of Warhammer objective markers. They're the big neoprene ones that are about 6.5 inches across, so you put the whole marker down, and then you don't have to measure out 3 inches from an objective. I played on those all last weekend at Pro Tabletop, and I gotta say, it is way better than a normal objective marker. So I actually really enjoyed playing on those. I think we're giving away 2 sets, right, Dan?
Yep, we have 2 sets, so we're gonna have 2 winners. Whoever we draw first, well, whoever responds first gets to pick colors because there's 2 different colors.
Whoever responds first, damn. I was gonna say, why don't we go ahead and say that we give, because we've had a lot of people comment so far. How about we give 1 set to someone in the United States and 1 set to someone outside the United States? Because obviously we're a U.S. podcast. We got a lot of U.S. listeners, but I kind of want to give some to the European/Australians in the world.
Yeah, we could do that. I was going to say we could pick 1 from one post and 1 from another post because I have no idea how we're going to figure out if our people are like in the U.S. or not. I guess Facebook tells us everything we want to know.
That'd be really funny though. It's like, yeah, oh, you won. It's like, where are you? Oh, never mind. You're in the U.S.
No, we would put them in 2 different lists, and we would pick 1 from each list. You just Facebook stalk them. And if you don't have your country listed, then I don't know. We just throw you in there.
Yeah. We'll figure it out. I actually do really like the one in the States, 1 out of the States. That's pretty good.
I want to give at least 1 set to someone who's not in the United States, just because I appreciate you guys. I appreciate everyone who listens to the podcast, but I especially appreciate the people who aren't in Florida or even the United States who listen to us.
I really like the Australians. I don't even know what's going down
about it.
Well, like they just a GT was just one with like Dark Angels and something else. It was a weird soup list.
They're just next level. I don't get it. They're just next level.
I know, and I love it.
I do too. But I love all of our listeners, no matter where they are. So go comment on either one of those pages, and we will figure our shit out sometime before we mail it.
Yeah.
Definitely before that point, we'll know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Is that our last bit of... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, if anyone has any suggestions or any crazy thing they want to throw in as, like, just put it on those posts, on the giveaway posts, and we might take it into consideration. Because I love crazy stuff.
If you just post something weird enough, we might not make it random. We might just pick it.
No, it'll still be random.
Oh, okay, but it'll be random. All right.
But you might get a shout out. Random is more fun because
random is more fun.
The subjective, go ahead.
I actually got a lot of people at the Atlanta tournament who mentioned the podcast, which was very flattering and surprising. I didn't realize that many people listened to it. But I had several people walk up and tell me they enjoyed it. So that was awesome. Thank you to everyone who did that.
Yeah, that is really
I learned from last time not to do name shoutouts because I would forget one of you. But I appreciated every single person who mentioned the podcast to me.
Yeah. Alrighty. So, without further ado, so sorry all you people who were really here for the ado, but we're moving on.
Moving on to Atlanta?
Yeah, you were there. You take over, bud.
Okay, so this last weekend was the Pro Tabletop Atlanta Open. It was the first, pro event with the first, professional Warhammer players there because Obey Alliance has put together the beginnings of their little squad. It was awesome, honestly. Like, a lot of people hated on it early on because they didn't like how they thought the terrain was going to look. They didn't like the idea of people just getting a cash prize for playing Warhammer. They didn't like anything being advertised as pro because everyone's a hater. I honestly thought the event was amazing. It might have been the best singles event I've attended so far this season. Like, it was honestly really damn good. So a couple highlights I want to point out. First off, the terrain and the mats. So the terrain was completely standardized. Every single table was fully identical. There might have been some slight color variations, but every single piece of terrain was the same from table to table. And honestly, the terrain actually did look good. Yes, it was the MDF cutoff, so yes, everything was at strict 90-degree angles. It was great for competitive play. There was no argument about terrain at any single point in any of the games I played that weekend. No one argued about terrain at all, which is awesome. I don't like getting in arguments when I'm playing 40k. The terrain actually did look good. Like, when it was painted up, it had detail carved into it with a laser cutter, or however they make MDF. It had detail that could be painted. It looked really good. It was definitely much better than the, stack of foam hills that you sometimes see at events. It was definitely higher than average appearance terrain. Functionality was off the charts. And the fact that it was completely the same from table to table, I thought that was really cool because you could actually be prepared. You never felt like, oh, if I'd had this table. I mean, I'm sure everyone has been on a aquarium table terrain where there's just a couple little palm fronds, and then you go second against triple Shadow Swords and you just get wrecked.
Sorry to jump in on that. Shortly after Battle for the Peak, I was still running my Null Deploy Chaos list, and that's what I took to Carolina Crusade, which was very sparse, and it just was not fun because I expected a certain level of terrain. I didn't get it, and my list just fell apart because I relied on having like 1 to 2 line of sight blocking pieces that weren't just like right in the middle. Yeah. So being able to see a table and have a plan, and I believe did they release a table template before the event, like before lists were due? I know they had shown the terrain at least. I just don't know if it was in a standard layout or not.
Yes, so they showed pictures of the terrain. They gave the dimensions of it. They had the terrain for sale on their website. I know a couple of people had bought sets of the terrain and I played on it. So I got to play on the exact literal terrain that they were going to be using before I got to the event, which was awesome.
That's a huge deal just in list writing because you know what you can hide, you know what you can't hide, and that does like directly affect what you're going to bring in some cases.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I goofed up a little bit and I didn't actually play any games on the terrain until after I had submitted my list officially. But that was also because that was, a month and a half ago. However, I did get practice games on the table and I kind of got to figure out what my list would be able to do with it. And that was really valuable going into the event. And I think I built a pretty good list for the terrain set that they had. And just being able to know that I was going to get that consistency was amazing. Because I just did not care which table I played on. I played on stream tables. I played on tables, in the hallway outside. It didn't matter. It was the same table, and I had the same experience with it every time. The second part is the fat mats that were used. These were actually made by FLG, so it's kind of cool to see that Frontline was kind of collaborating with them and supporting the event in their way. So they're exactly like the fat mats that everyone knows and loves, the neoprene, and they were also really good. They had the 1-inch grids on it. I actually didn't end up using that part that much other than to just eyeball a couple quick things. But it wasn't distracting at all. Like, it had a really nice kind of urban ruined city feel to it, and it had the lines on it that were used for deployment zones. The deployment zones, I think, were the best part because you can see the table quarters laid out, and for the search and destroy, which means that for stuff like recon, you can absolutely see where you're supposed to go. And you can very quickly deploy in the kind of the off deployment zones, like the pointy Dawn of War, the pointy Hammer and Anvil, Vanguard Strike. All of those ones, it has the lines laid directly down on the mat, and I just thought that was awesome.
Yeah, I want to jump in real fast because one thing I didn't know is I didn't know they had the 1-inch grids on there. And I don't care at all for 40K, but the D&D nerd inside of me fell in love because that's just awesome.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that they're going to... I mean, they could totally replicate that for like a D&D map or something like that.
Exactly.
But
and
what
I love that as a potential premise for other games too. But go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of used that. The only thing I really used the grids for, I didn't ever use it when my opponent was moving stuff. I more used it when I was just kind of looking at the table like, all right, I'm about 9 grids away from that objective. That means that, I'm definitely going to have to advance my scouts if I want to get it. I was just doing quick count stuff like that. I was making sure that my Thunderfire and my Gunner were 3 grids away from each other so that I could fire my guns. Just little stuff like that means I didn't have to bust out a tape measure during my opponent's turn when I was looking at what I wanted to do. I could just kind of stare at the board and see it. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, to jump in on that too, I absolutely love that because there are times I feel like I'm giving away strategy because I'm measuring something on my opponent's turn, and then they're going to want to move that model. And that's not in the sense of gotcha hammer, but at the same time, like, I don't want to tell you, like, I don't want to measure from my obliterators 24 inches out and see if you just moved into their like window, or 28 if I need to move, or 29 if I need to advance.
And then you make eye contact and then move your models back.
Yeah, exactly. So having the grid just to eyeball that so you don't give up strategy to the opponent, I like a lot. Like that, I didn't even think about that because I was distracted by like a D&D thing, but
so
that is
not
great,
sponsored, but is FLG selling that style of mat on their website now? Because I haven't seen it pop up on their like email list or anything.
I don't think FLG is selling it directly. I think that you can buy the mats from the Pro Tabletop people on their website. I do have a mat because your ticket to the event came with a mat. Dude. As well as a t-shirt, a set of objectives, some other cool stuff.
That's awesome.
So I do have a set of those neoprene objectives, which were great because, again, there's no argument about whether or not you're on a piece of terrain. It's very easy to see. I really like that, honestly. The whole thing was really cool. The way that the mats and the terrain was set up, everything being standardized just streamlined a lot of parts of the game that sometimes get argued about. The last thing that I want to shout out about it was that the terrain had preset spots on the mat for where it was supposed to go. Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, that means that putting normal terrain, just doing a random game on the mat, might look a little weird because there are spaces for the terrain. On the other hand, if you are using their terrain on their mat, it's awesome. Because all the time, I'd be having shit going on in a ruin. I'd be piling into models, I'd be rolling dice in the area, and the building's just in the way because it's 40K. Stuff gets in the way all the time. Literally just lift that thing right up. You play around, you finish the turn, you drop it right back in the exact same spot. There's no argument about where it's supposed to go, where it's supposed to be. If the train got bumped, you know exactly where it's supposed to be. And plenty of times, like, I just bumped the terrain. That's just a fact of life. You're reaching models, you're pulling stuff out of there. You're going to shift the terrain a little bit. You roll dice into it, you're getting it out. Every time that happened, I would see, oh, look, the corner is no longer lined up with the corner of the outline on the mat. Just nudge it right back. Perfect. You keep going.
Yeah.
A lot of those little factors I thought were awesome.
Yeah. And this is something that just came to mind as well. So there are some cases where an argument can come from, like the people who move their stuff a little bit more nonchalantly, where it's like, this character has a 6-inch movement. And then they kind of measure it out and then just move it. And you're like, I'm pretty sure that was more like 8 inches. But you don't want to really start that argument on small things. I feel like even something as simple as that grid on the table for both of you to see is a lot easier for that type of stuff to be guided as well, if that makes sense. So it does sound like that type of standardization that you're describing would fix a lot of the problems that I feel like we run into in a lot of events that we go to.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, that's super neat.
I think that was one of the stated rationales behind the grid, and I didn't use it for that personally, but you absolutely could if you wanted to do a quick count after someone moved something. But yeah, it was all good. I think it was just everything about the terrain, the mats I enjoyed. And I really liked that the ruins were straight 90-degree angles on the outside of the wall. You know, sometimes those ruins, like they kind of start to fade at the end. They kind of curve down, like the windows are broken. There's little pieces sticking up and down, and you're kind of bobbing your head up and down to see if you can see through the tip of the window, the gun that's sticking out. When it's just a straight line up and down, it's so much easier to check line of sight.
Yeah. Before we go, because we're kind of transitioning into the standardized tables in general.
We're going too far.
Before we dive that too deep, because that is a really good discussion that I want to really get into, I want to circle back to Pro Tabletop and their stream. Obviously, John, you didn't watch much of that stream because you were playing. And real fast, too, you did make top 8, which is awesome, and congratulations. And, of course, Sigler won the event, so another huge win for Brohammer. Of course, he's a robot.
He's the machine.
And it was the perfect scenario for him because everything was gridded out and everything was... So it just functioned for his robot brain.
His robot brain.
Exactly. But just another great showing from Brohammer. And we had Cody Saltz, who we've been giving crap to for about a month now, every day in the chat. Somehow actually managed to convince people he was the best sport there. So, like, I still haven't figured out how, but he got that. That was cool. And we had a bunch of other guys there who played and did well and had a lot of fun. So as always, I like to hype up all of the bros, and of course Lennon and Sigler for both placing top 8 and winning. So, but going back to the stream, I didn't watch a ton of the stream just because I've been busy, and Warhammer streams in general are only so engaging for me personally because I'd rather be playing. But they did one of my favorite things that I've seen on any stream, and that was the rolling scores. I didn't care about anything else, but if I wanted to see how Tim was doing on his game while I'm watching Lennon streamed and they're jumping to Sigler's game that's also being streamed, I can see, oh, Tim is up by 3 points in his game, and then go over and see, okay, Mark Perry's doing this, Ruben's doing that. Like, you're able to check up on all of the people you're interested in while still watching the stream. And that part was my absolute favorite. Like, if no other events take anything out of Pro Tabletop except for that, I would still be happy.
How did they keep that live? Were they using an app for scoring?
So every single game was scored with the ITC Battles app, which if you haven't used it, go take a look. It's literally an app that just scores games for just for ITC missions, so for the champs missions. So the way it worked is that if you're logged into BCP on your phone and you log into this app, ITC Battles, you could create a tournament. And so you just create one for yourself called Atlanta Open, and then you create a game, and then you hit there's a little button where you sync it, and it checks you have your email associated with it. It finds which pairing is associated with you at the present. So I could, before my round 1, I could create a game on my phone and just between me and opponent. And then I try to sync it with my BCP app, and it looks at BCP app and it says, okay, you're currently scheduled to play Stephen Valley. And it's like, is this the game you want? I click yes. And then boom, my name and Stephen's name is on the ITC Battles app. And as I score at every turn, the guys in the booth there was like a little side room where they had a 3-man crew and then 2 announcers running all the tech behind the scenes. They could see live updates from the scores. They could see what the scores were at any point. And as we updated it, they immediately got to see it. So, after turn 2 of my game, the score could be seen on the side, almost, NFL Red Zone style, for people who are watching the streams. And I thought, I didn't get to see it, but conceptually that sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I loved it. I didn't know that you could link your BCP and your Battles app. I was just trying to do that now while we're talking.
You can only do it if you have an active tournament up. So if you're not currently in a tournament where there is a round running, it's not going to work.
Right,
So,
but just linking the accounts, I because my scores at the last couple tournaments since I started using this were having trouble being submitted, and I think it's because I was logged in using the BCP or using the Battles app and then not submitting that way. So that might have been why things were getting messed up. But I didn't realize you could sync them like that. So that was what I was looking at. But I really like that, and I like the rolling scores, and that it's possible with that. Like the tech support that Warhammer is getting in general on the tournament side is super convenient. So I'm glad to see it integrated.
I'll admit I'm the least qualified technical person in this podcast, so I'm not going to really try to explain how that actually worked, but it did work. And if you ever play an event where they're doing that, it is actually super convenient because there's no pen and paper. You can definitely take notes on the side if you want, but it was not necessary.
Yeah. So, Jimmy, was there anything you noticed from
cut out for a moment.
observations?
Notice from observations, you said?
Yeah, any observations or anything that you wanted to bring up as well?
Did you get to watch any of the stream games this weekend? Because I didn't get to watch them myself. However, everything that I saw looked really good. They had quite a few cameras going around, and I think they were getting a lot of action shots as well.
Yeah. So I've watched just a bit of replays. I didn't get the chance to watch any of it live. But, yeah, it did seem neat in the way that they were able to switch between tables. And then, of course, the rolling score is still keeping you up to date with not just the ones that were being streamed, but everybody there. And, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it seemed effective.
Okay. Yeah, so final word on Pro Tabletop. Playing on stream was cool. I thought them having a lot of cameras looked awesome. I thought it ran very smoothly. There were not a lot of rules arguments. They had more than enough judges there for the amount of players. So there was never an issue with me finding a judge. Every time I needed one, I got a judge to my table in about 30 seconds or less. You know how every once in a while, like you have a question and you're like looking around and you just cannot see the judge for the life of you. That was not a problem here at all. It went really well. They've talked about at the event that they want to turn this into a small Pro Tabletop circuit, where they run multiple events a year. I would absolutely go back. The venue was amazing. It was played in like an esports arena, which I was not personally familiar with because I'm not a huge video game player, but it was honestly badass. It was at Axis Replay in Atlanta. Really cool venue. I hope they hold it there again. It was worth the $200, which I know sounded high and scared a lot of people off. It was absolutely worth the money. Getting a mat is pretty cool. Getting a t-shirt was cool. Really well-run event. Everything was perfectly on time. For a first-year event, I was very, very impressed.
Yeah.
Let me put it out. Just for considering that this was the first time they'd attempted it, I thought they knocked it out of the park. I'm sure that they will find ways to improve. I think my largest criticism, and this is a nitpick, is their group/bracket system for day 2 felt kind of confusing, and it also felt a little redundant. Just as an example, so after day 1, they took the top 8 and they cut them into groups. So 1 through 8 were in groups 1 through 8, and then they kind of did a snake for 9 through 16, 17 through 24, etc., working them back into the same groups. And then you played in your group exclusively on day 2, and whoever had the best record over 6 games from that group then made it into the top 8 on day 3. And I happened to be the highest ranked from my group at 5-1 afterwards. But I need to double check this. Of the top 8 after day 1, so the 8 1 seeds who were then put into the groups, I think all 8 of them won their groups. I'm not making that up. Like, that could just be random chance. And yeah, it's cool to give, 2 through 10 or whatever it was, the chance to go win that group. But I'm pretty sure that literally the number 1 seeds went ahead and won their groups afterwards. And that just kind of amuses me. I think there might have been one group where that wasn't the case. Maybe Justin Lois might have not been in the top 8 after day 1, but then then won his group anyway. But at least 7 of the people who won their group were the leaders going into the day. So that was just kind of amusing, I thought. I think that they could probably tweak that system a little bit, but I don't really have recommendations on how. So I'm going to sit back and kind of see what they do, because I think the concept worked. I think like really that's what this was about, right? Everyone thought, oh, this is going to be a fire fest of 40K. And it ran smoothly. There wasn't a lot of drama at the event. Everything looked good. Everything ran well. They were able to deliver on what they promised. And if they hold another event, I'm 100% going to go.
I think my criticism, again, as a viewer instead of a player, the stream, they usually would move between tables. It felt like a little too long in between. So it was like long enough to get invested in that game, and then they jumped to the next one. And by the time they went back to that game, you forgot what was going on, or the game state was completely different. I think if they just moved between games a little bit faster, or something similar, it might be a little smoother, just so people, like if I want to watch, let's say the Eldar versus Tau matchup, that's going to be really interesting because I really like the Xenos armies. I don't feel like watching Space Marines. But then we might have someone who absolutely loves Space Marines and is glad they're finally in their element, and they want to watch the Iron Hands versus the Imperial Fists. Well, Imperial Fists weren't there, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So it's like a 10-minute lull where you're just twiddling your thumbs waiting to go back to your game. If they sped it up a little bit more, or maybe even had like 2 little windows where it's like you can still see the other 2 games, but they like blow up the one and commentate on that, and then they switch between them. Something along those lines, to where anyone, like if I love Chaos, so I want to watch Chaos more than I want to watch Space Marine versus Space Marine. So if I have a way where I can stay plugged into the Chaos matchup while everyone else is getting what they want too, like that would, from a viewer standpoint, be something I would enjoy a little bit more. But honestly, we still are getting 3 games per round streamed. Like it's not bad. It's just a nitpick. Again, something little that I think wouldn't be too hard to do that I would really enjoy personally.
Yeah, they could even do, and I don't know if this is something they thought about and just explicitly avoided for some reason, but if they're highlighting 4 or so games, having 4 separate channels that has the thing going the whole time.
I think splitting viewership might be tricky for them, and you'd have to have different commentators, or just have one primary channel for commentators. Those would be the concerns with that. But that's another option they could have too, is have each game on a different channel.
And part of this may also be the limitations of Twitch. I know that, when they have a camera pointed at each table, or probably like 2 or 3, those cameras are rolling the whole time. So they have the footage. Maybe there's a point where they can, let a viewer choose which camera angle they're watching, and then just have a main camera angle, which is the one the commenters are talking about. But then if you're not getting the audio of the game, I'm not sure how much you're actually picking up. I intend to go back and rewatch. I haven't gotten to do that much yet, so I don't want to comment too much on the video aspect, other than the fact that they had a lot of cameras, they were high quality, and they were getting angles that you don't see at a 40K tournament up until this point.
Yeah, and again, like I really enjoyed the stream. I thought it was quality. That was, again, my only real nitpick is missing out on one game for the other. Mm-hmm. So, yeah,
that's reasonable. But you get to see more games that maybe you wouldn't have seen any of it all before.
Oh, absolutely, so. and that's why it's kind of a double-edged sword. And I'm not saying what they did was bad. I really enjoyed it. Just a way, in my opinion, that they could improve. Probably the easiest way would just be have 2 little windows with the other 2 games, and then switch between the 3. So that way you can always at least see a little bit of what's going on in one.
Yeah, that's fair.
And actually, sorry, I'm going on a tangent. But if the commentators also see all 3, it could be a little bit like NFL Red Zone, where you're watching, let's say it's the shooting phase for, like, they're wrapping up the shooting phase for one game, and in the other one, they're in the combat phase, and you see a knight blow up. So you can switch over real fast and see did the knight explode, what's going on. And you can kind of get that quick hit because you notice, hey, this really big, interesting, like, pivotal thing happened in this game, and you can kind of see what led up to it and then get to it a little quicker. So I don't know, just a thought I had, but the logistics behind that, I don't know how crazy it is.
Makes sense. All right, so really good event. I'm very happy I got to go. Very proud of Richard Sigler again, our man, for dominating it. We didn't dive into the games as much this time, just as a time thing, and because, you know, again, I'm running the same list that I've run in multiple other events, but I do want to give a shout out to my opponents. I definitely had a lot of very good games this weekend and had a lot of fun this week. So just because we're not going over that, I just kind of wanted to talk more about the actual event as a whole, not my individual games, just because this is the first event of its kind. It's not just another ITC format event where maybe my games would be the most interesting talking point. I mean, this is the first pro event, I think, that sets it aside as its own beast. So I kind of wanted to focus on that this episode. With that said, we are going to turn it more towards talking about standardized 40K and the future of it.
Yep.
So
and a little bit the professional side, even, like, as you get money events, you get sponsors involved, having a standard to work on and work by, you get a little more of a conformed rule set to where you don't feel like there's a competitive advantage based on X factor. Everything is as much the same as possible to keep everyone on the same page.
So the first thing is that standardization, some people kind of see it as more boring. It definitely makes things more fair. And I get it, it's a dice game. Nothing will ever be perfectly fair. But we have definitely all had those games where the table we were on influenced the game that we played. I mean, I've had games where, like, I was setting up on a table and then I got switched my tables and I suddenly thought, oh, thank God I have a chance now, or, oh no, I'm totally screwed.
Yeah, I've been there too.
You know, I had one game where I walked up to the table and it was pretty much a bare desert, and I was playing against a Tau player. I thought I was just going to get wrecked. I got lucky and my opponent had actually already played on that table, so we switched tables and we had a much closer game than we otherwise would have had. I like the standardized effect because it's going to shape list design at a certain point. This year being the first time, I don't think everyone took it into account as much as they should have, maybe didn't plan appropriately for what the terrain and the venue is going to be like. However, it absolutely will be a part of list design if you know what the terrain is going to be like exactly going into the event. I mean, people already try to plan for what they call frontline gaming terrain, which is the type of terrain that you see at, LVO, SoCal, BAO. But if you literally have the exact terrain in your house that you're going to be playing on at the event, that changes how you're going to build your list, and it's a big deal. And I think that this event was showing the next step of competitive 40K, and I think standardized terrain is absolutely going to be part of it. You've kind of seen pseudo standardized terrain at the Nova Open, where they have the same format, but not every single piece of terrain is identical. Sometimes you hit an L-shaped ruin in one board that's taller than it is on the other, or a corner hill that is shorter than it is on another table. I definitely had a game where my opponent had a large ruin in his corner and I had a small one in mine. And that felt bad because he was hiding tanks and I couldn't hide infantry. And I think while I like the standardized format, getting each terrain piece literally identical, which, let's be honest, is going to be done with MDF. It's the best way to make things actually identical. I think that's got to be part of the future.
Yeah, and so kind of the bigger discussion around all of this is when you are playing a game that you win and lose on decisions and dice, you want to make everything else as objective as possible. You want to eliminate all of the variables that can lead to a bad feeling moment. So by standardizing terrain and terrain placement, not only does it create a good practice environment, but it also helps eliminate questions in the game. Like you were saying earlier, if a terrain piece gets bumped or, maybe you walk up and like you said, one side, the terrain's twice as tall as it as it is on the other side. Well, then you have a die roll to decide who gets to pick table quarter, and then they get the really awesome terrain, you get the really crappy terrain, and you just feel bad from the start. So when you get everything on the same exact page leading up to the event, it becomes a little more like chess, where when two people are playing chess, you have the exact same pieces on the exact same grid, and every decision you make determines if you're going to win or lose. And you're getting more to that level with the variable. Besides skill as a variable, you have dice as your secondary variable. So because sports analogies are fun and I'm becoming an old man, like when you're playing in a close football game, someone might fumble the ball. That's like the random element. That's like the dice element in football. And that's what makes, for me, that sport so engaging, is you can have a really close tactical game and then that random element comes in and changes it. Well, if there's just too many random things, like one team gets cleats, one team doesn't get cleats, okay, we know who's going to win that 9 10. Yeah. But when everything else is the same, it makes the random elements that much more memorable and that much more important to the game.
Yeah. And it's almost like you're playing football or something, and it's like, all right, spin that wheel. Okay, the terrain this time is the desert. Like, you kind of take away the standardized field type and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, or you go to Mexico and play on an 80-yard field instead of a 100-yard field. Like, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, so another neat thing that we've talked about before is kind of playing your own game, especially with certain list constructions, where the other person has their goal, and some armies are better at just playing their own game without necessarily interacting with the other army. So, like the 30-point list that we were talking about, if you can rely on a certain construction and height and all that of your terrain, then you can be like, oh, this vehicle, its intention by turn 3 is to be here, take this position, you know what I mean? Like, it's easier to coordinate those types of actions and become more confident in a game plan, having already practiced in that way.
Yeah, and you get used to certain measurements. So if I deploy here in this deployment, I'll be 8 inches from this terrain piece. So I need a 2-inch advance to get behind that terrain piece. Is that worth it, or do I need to put a different type of buff into my list? Like, you can get really into a lot of my to gear your list for these tables. And again, when everything is standardized, it's not like you roll, you get a 2. Okay, is that 8 inches now enough? My opponent's saying I'm half an inch short. Well, I've got it gridded out in the exact placement that it's been for the last month that I've measured every single time. I know I needed to roll that 2, and I did. Like, again, when you eliminate the weird subjective questions that make people feel bad, and it becomes a me versus you off the table, like, you eliminate those moments and it makes the game so much more fun, and like you can actually engage with your opponent and have a good time instead of feel like you're fighting against them for every little thing you can. Yeah.
And we're kind of running around the same idea without necessarily spelling it out clearly. But if Warhammer 40k is going to end up being a competitive sport, especially for like an audience, you kind of have to line it back up with other sports. So things that have standard rules and standard layouts, and it's not just a big random element that kind of decides the game before the two opponents step up to it. Taking as much of that out is getting us closer to that baseline of being like a competitive sport that people would enjoy watching. And it seems like that is kind of the goal of the innovation that they've made. I didn't realize until this discussion really how much they had done to try to reach that point. It sounds like there's a lot of steps taken to make that tournament get to that level, which is really neat.
Yeah, and you actually made me think of it with esports and why, like, League of Legends feels really good to watch. Kind of like football. You have your arena. In football, you know your field, you know 100 yards, the end zones, you know all that stuff. And you get excited when you see a certain type of play. In League of Legends, it's very much the same. You have a standard Summoner's Rift with the 3 lanes. it's about 15 minutes. They can, like, you might start seeing some action at Dragon or Baron, or like you're looking for certain things at certain points. And the more you get into a game, the smaller details you see. Like football, okay, did I win the coin? Did I defer to the second half? So I can try to double up possessions at the end of the first half and the beginning of the second. Like, you get into the smaller little details of things, the more you get involved in the game. Same thing with League of Legends. When it's standard, you can do that in Warhammer as well. So if you know by turn 3, certain style lists want to take the middle of the table because they get this ruin or they get this distinct advantage, like you're rooting for your team, I'll say, to make that play, you see that play coming, and then the more you watch and the more experience you get, you start to notice, okay, he gave up hold more. Why did he give up hold more? What advantage is he playing for? When you have variables that everyone is accustomed to, you can find all the littler details as a viewer, and you get more engaged in it. Instead of just like looking at it like what's going on, you feel like you're part of it.
Yeah, and I agree. That makes me excited for the future of competitive 40K and where that can go. But John, as a tournament organizer, now having run Battle for the Peak last year, and it is going to be happening again surely this year, are you interested in using those type of standardization rules in your format, or are you going to kind of see how it rolls out again in the upcoming 2020 season before you would try to use something like that?
I'm definitely interested. I kind of want to see what Pro Tabletop's next move is, because while I think this was great, I know, I got to talk to a lot of those guys. I know they're not going to do anything resembling resting on laurels. They're going to go look at what they did and see how they can improve it. I kind of want to see what their second take is going to be, because I think that is probably going to end up being a phenomenal tournament. Like, this was a very good tournament for the first time. I thought it was fantastic, but I think that when they take all the information that they learned and they go out and do it again, I think it's going to be probably one of the best events in the world. So I kind of want to see that before I try to copy anything. And especially, I have to consider cost. Standardizing terrain is great, but, Battle for the Peak, a lot of its success was built on the fact that we had terrain that we got from local events, like Crucible, with Tim and Reggie helping us out. Getting a new set of standardized terrain would be a very good long-term goal. I just don't know if that's going to be a next year kind of situation, honestly. Now, if we were starting out doing it on our own and had, the kind of funding and backers that Pro Tabletop had, that would be an amazing thing. So I don't really know how I'm going to proceed with that yet, honestly. I would like to have more standardized terrain, though. And if I can make that happen at my event, then by all means, I would love to. I'd love to be able to follow in their footsteps and have those standardized tables eventually. I just don't know if we're going to get there immediately next year, or if we're going to kind of keep working on our low budget, working with what we have.
Yeah. I do know that they made like different levels of their terrain as far as like detail. So that way they had little more than like cardboard cutout at first blush, but it's the MDF, it's the same dimensions, it's the same functionality, it just doesn't look as pretty. But they do have a cheaper line of terrain that, like, even if you only had to bump ticket sales $5 a person, if you could put that to just make the top 4 or top 8 tables that standard, it's not ideal and it's not perfect, but at least as people start floating to the top, they can start feeling like, well, if I'm 3-0 and I got stuck on this table and he's GT because he got a better table than me. So at least you can eliminate that type of feeling if that was ever an issue. It wasn't at peak, I didn't feel, but that type of thing, any tournament organizer can at least try to bring a little bit into the top tables, where you're putting the clocks on the table, you've got a judge kind of close by. You can also get those tables set up and hopefully on the upper ends at least try to help out and make it run as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The big part is that I don't want to sacrifice aesthetics, because I would want to get the highest quality terrain they make just because it'll look the best. And yes, functionally it is all identical, and I would totally get one of the minimum ones for my practice board, because I would play on, if I'm just playing a game in my house, I would play on cardboard if it was functional. I don't care what it looks like at all, because, you know, whenever I'm doing a practice game, it's probably with unpainted miniatures or, you know, proxies. Like, I might be throwing an Iron Warrior's Rhino down as my, you know, White Scar Impulsor just to see what happens. You know, I don't care about the aesthetics of a practice game, but for tournaments, I would want it to look as good as possible. So I don't think I would go for their cheap models, because I want to improve the event without detracting from any of the parts that made it great. I don't want to trade. I want to just make it. I just want to make everything better always.
Net gain, not a net wash. Gotcha.
Yeah. So, I think that this will be the future, and it is something we will pursue. But change is slow to adopt, so I'm not gonna sit here and promise that next year we're gonna have all standardized, nicely painted terrain like Pro Tabletop, because that is hard to do. So kudos to them for pulling it off, but I'm not gonna claim we can replicate that yet. I gotta look at a lot more before we get to that point.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, one thing, and this is 100% shot in the dark, first hot take impression, but I don't know what their intentions are for the future with tournament circuit and all that, but maybe they would be interested in adopting some like sponsored events, and that would be a good way to get in line with their tournament standard if they also had like a hand in it. You know what I mean? Not saying that would happen for Battle of the Peak, but it'd be interesting to see if they try to
reach out to established events and integrate.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. And then they basically flip the 40k scene competitively overall at once, or try to progressively do that each year.
And you can see that they brought their streaming crew to ATC, and they were streaming there just on the normal ATC tables. So I would not be surprised at all if Pro Tabletop started to partner with existing events. I think they'd go for more established events than Battle for the Peak, if I were to guess. But certainly, I would not be surprised if that was their next part of their next move. But they're definitely looking to expand, and they want multiple events. So anything could happen for them.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great.
And then, the thing I wanted to mention is, and again, I heard this at the event, is that they're exploring the idea of having 3 tables that you could play on instead of 1. I actually love this, because, you know, people, for whatever reason, people don't want to play on the exact same board every single time, which I get. But if, for example, Pro Tabletop had 3 possible tables, and you could go buy the terrain sets for all 3, and you would know exactly what you're going to get, that would work just as well. Like, for example, StarCraft, you know, it's considered a relatively balanced game, I think, but you don't play on the same map every time. But there is a limited number of maps, so you can practice on every map and then know the ins and outs, the little secrets of it, so that you're not worried about those things. You could absolutely do the same with 40k. So if you had 5 different standardized, or 3 or 5 or however many standardized tables, you could start to track things. Like, you could say, oh man, like, you know, there's Ruined City, and then there's Graveyard, and then there's Burnt Down Forest, and, you know, give them little names, or, you know, I'm sure they'll come up with something more clever than I'm doing on the spot. I actually like that idea the best. I want terrain to be standardized to the point where I can predict what I could be playing on, but the idea of having 3 or 4 different tables to choose from appeals to me, so that every game isn't fully identical. I know what I'm going to get into going into the event, because I never want to just walk up to a table and think, oh man, I did not plan on just being shoved into a corner with nothing but a palm tree to hide behind. Because that feels really bad. So as long as you know what the different table setups are going into an event, I think that would honestly be the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and even adding 2 more maps, it starts to multiply your variables, because now it's like, oh, I'm on map type 2 playing objective 6, and I'm going against chaos. Like, just changing those types of options, and it's just 3 different variables who you're fighting against, your objective, and your map, makes it to where you have tons of possibilities. Like, no 2 games will end up being the same because of those, what seem to be minute differences.
So, sorry, I just got on the Pro Tabletop website and found they've got the map layout, the terrain pieces and everything. And just looking at the map, like, the integrations of how they put objective markers on it, the terrain, everything, like it fits and it looks good, but it's super intuitive. Like, you know, everything just looking at it. I'm really impressed by this. Sorry to kind of jump in and go back a little bit, but
you hadn't actually looked at it? Damn.
Not so. I had previously looked at all the terrain and stuff, but I hadn't seen the map outside of on the stream, which there's models, there's terrain pieces, but just the bare flat map. Which, Jimmy, I don't know if we can like throw this picture on the YouTube video or something.
Yeah.
If not, I mean, everyone can go find it at Pro Tabletop, their website. But it is amazing how intuitive it is, and like it's like one of those picture games where the longer you look, the more you find. And yeah, I was very skeptical before, and now I am all about it. Like I'm all in.
Well, I have one of the mats, so you can check it out.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited.
You could finally take John up on that game offer.
Yeah, that I've been trying to play him in the practice game for about 6 months now. He keeps dodging me.
You know what? I invited you over this Saturday, but you're going to go. You're going to go win an Iron Man instead.
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully, we'll see about that. Maybe not. I don't know.
Cody's going to be there. It's going to be real tough.
Yeah, it will actually be a pretty difficult, I imagine.
No, yeah, the density of players that go to Florida, how many good players there are, as long as you don't ask anyone else. Yeah, there's no good players in Florida.
Yeah, other than Sigler. So yeah, that's about all I had to say regarding the future. I really like the standardized format, and I think it's going to end up being the way, so to speak. I expect we'll see more Pro Tabletop events next year.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have a little circuit, kind of within the ITC, not as a competitor. So all their events, I think they intend to be ITC points, but kind of have maybe 5 events throughout the year, and they use those events to seed the final one. Because they were experimenting with the seeding process, and I don't think that I don't know. It was a little bit confusing. I didn't quite understand what the benefits to being a high or low seed was, because honestly, it seemed to me like being the low seed was better, and that's not sure if that's what they're going for or not. However, I could see it being very cool in the future if, for example, the December Atlanta Open was the capstone of the season, and you got to go to a bunch of other smaller, maybe 64-person Pro Tabletop events with smaller cash prizes, but you still got to play in that same standardized format. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, or maybe they did what I think would be cool is if they had an invitational where you had to finish top 4 to get an invite. And so if they had 10 of those, then they'd have a 40-person event that could be for more money, even though it's less people, because you can only get there through an invite. Something like that, to make you really want to go and perform well and, I don't know, win cash and win the chance at more cash.
Yep. I don't know. I mean, I would definitely just stay tuned. I think they've done something really cool, and I imagine they're not going to stop. So I'm looking forward to it. I kind of like the idea of Pro 40K. I really like the idea of Pro 40K. I am not a Pro 40K player like our boy Sigler now is, because he is officially signed with Obey Alliance, and we'll kind of get to see more of what that means in January, February. But I'm excited for him. I'm excited to watch it. So I just think it's all really cool. I'm excited for the future of 40K.
Yeah, I think it'll be really good. And without going too deep into the pro discussion, hopefully we see more people who are deserving of it get sponsored and get that recognition, and really get the competitive level to that next level, and start getting more people just in general interested in the hobby, because the more people that are interested, the more people are playing, and the better it is for everyone.
Well, hopefully next time you guys can tag along with me.
Yeah, I was so upset that I couldn't go. I just couldn't get the time off from work. I had the opportunity to get that ticket. They were going to let me get that list in after lists were due because of the circumstance. I mean, everything was falling into place, and then I just couldn't get that day off of work. So I'll make sure I do.
Next time we'll get that in advance.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
I want to jump in one last time. I'm looking at their prices for their tables, and they're really reasonably. And honestly, like the practice boards don't really look that great, but it's only like $30 more to upgrade to the standard, which has detail and looks just fine. So like, if you're interested in getting this terrain and practicing, it's reasonably priced, and when you start practicing on it and we start getting more of these events, it'll make it that much easier.
Where are you finding that?
It is on the, let me go back to their URL, protabletop.com/shop, and you can find all the stuff you want there. Do we want to post that link somewhere as part of this?
You can stick it in the description.
Yeah, I can attach it.
Cool. We'll do that. We'll stick it in the description. Leonard will put it when he posts this all over the internet. We'll get you guys looking at all this stuff because it's super cool. And yeah, go ahead.
One other thing that I this is a guess. This is not based on what I talked to the organizers about at the event. I'm really hoping that Pro Tabletop creates a team event at some point. Just because, the part where they're streaming multiple tables at once, while that's cool, and you kind of talked about how you were only interested in one game, I really think, like what they did at ATC, I think that would be like the ultimate pro event. So I know Obey Alliance started their team. They've got Nick Nanavati, Mark Perry, Richard Sigler, all great guys, all great friends of mine. Awesome. There isn't another team yet, and I'm sure that will come with time. However, imagine if like they had this set up where it was a team event and they had 5 stream tables, for example, and you got to see all 5, the standardized terrain where they've got 3 tables. They've got a medium, a light, and a heavy terrain board. Just out of the park, amazing. Like if I were to make a wish list, I would say I hope Pro Tabletop makes a team event.
Yeah, and that would be even like just so awesome because if they did even just similar prizes, so each individual wins less, but getting 4 of your friends together and saying, let's go win some money and have a great weekend, like that just adds so much more like to it. Like I don't know. It just, I love that idea as well. Everything about that just seems fun. And the more we can encourage sportsmanship and team gaming in an individual competition like this, like that, the more I'm about it. That's a whole purpose of Brohammer.
Yeah, so hopefully that's something they look at in the future. We will have to wait and see on that one. I do not know their plans in that aspect at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy, did you have anything else to add before we break this thing down?
Nope.
Yeah, I think I'm good too. Just look out for the giveaway. Like, subscribe. Let us know you're listening. If you have any questions, anything at all, throw it at us. We'll deal with it. We do like user questions. It gives us another thing to talk about. So if you have any ideas or anything you want us to cover, there's a ton of new content, new rules, new stuff. So we'll go over all of it. Just tell us what you want to hear. And with that, I appreciate y'all listening.
Me too. Have a wonderful night.
Yep. Have a good night. Thanks for listening, guys.
See ya.